This is Novel Marketing, the show for novelists who aren't necessarily fond of marketing, but still want to become best-selling authors.
Episode 136.
I'm James L. Rubart, but you can call me Jim.
I'm Thomas Umstadt Jr.
I'm Alex Newton.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to sell more books. There's an old saying that says, what gets measured gets managed. So if we measure our sales process and we can see what's working and what's not working, there's a much greater chance we'll pay attention to it and manage the process. Or put another way, the more you understand about how readers find you and why they find you and why they buy books on Amazon, the more books you're going to sell. And today, to help us dive deep into this subject is our guest, Alex Newton, the CEO and founder of K-lytics.com, which is a leading market research resource for authors and publishers, or put in terms that are more understandable, his company and his expertise helps authors sell more books, face less competition, and get a much bigger return on the time and money that they put into their careers. Now, Alex is based in Germany, and if you get him talking about the World Soccer Championship, he might never stop. So he's very passionate. He has 20 years of worldwide consulting experience, and for the past 4 years, he's focused on Amazon and eBooks. And what we love about Alex is he has this unique ability to translate complex data that would confuse most of us and put it in layman's terms so that the average writer can understand it, not only understand it, but actually apply it to their books and take action on the data. So, Alex, so great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and we just lost an important football game yesterday. So I'm not in depression, so I look forward to this.
Okay. Right,
well, you
good.
don't have to worry about the United States and the World Cup. We decided that it was too good for us, so it's one less competition you have. So why quit your career and go into book marketing?
Well, a long story short, a couple of things came together. About 20 years I've been living out of the suitcase, being a corporate management consultant Monday to Friday. My little daughter was born, and I really had to look into, hey, are there any other models to generate income? So at that time, I started researching internet business models and how to create income online and especially from home. And I think it was especially at the time when we had what I think we could call the Kindle gold rush, with many, and things came together. Many authors at the time suffered from what I called back then paleo breakfast recipes syndrome and publishing disorder. Well, let me explain. I signed up to one of these how to get rich with Kindle type of courses that you could buy a couple of years ago. And everybody on that course was jumping on the bandwagon of, publishing recipes and cookbooks and these sort of things. Now, having been in corporate management consulting for 20 years, I'm very much a fact person, right? So I started to look at the facts and said, well, first of all, I've never seen anybody cook in the kitchen with a Kindle next to him or her. And I started looking onto the Amazon platform, and I saw things about sales rank and category sizes, and I started putting things together. And before I knew it, I had a first report together on the sales performance of the top Amazon, the big 30 main categories. I gave it to a couple of authors and in that group, and they tore it out of my hands, say, hey, do you have more? And can you do this on subcategories and so on and so forth? Here we go, 4 years later. That was when K-lytics was born, and here we are for 4 years later going strong.
And you get to spend time with your daughter. You're not doing the traveling.
And that's the most important thing. So these days, I literally can bring my daughter to school, and I spend every breakfast and lunch and dinner at home.
So what does K-lytics stand for?
Well, the K stands for Kindle, and lytics stands for analytics. And originally, it was actually called, when we went live, or I went live, I was alone back then, we called it Kindlelytics, which I thought was an extremely fancy title. So the website went live, and immediately I got a a storm of people. Oh my God, Amazon is going to sue you. You have Kindle in the domain name, and etc. So, but the site was live. I said, well, what can I do with the graphics, with everything? So I took out the Indle from Kindle, and that's how we ended up with K-lytics. Here we are.
Nice. I love that. I love that. So, Alex, let's talk about some of the details of what K-lytics does for authors. I mean, boil it down for us. What's the essence of what you guys do for aspiring authors and established authors?
Right. Well, in essence, in simple terms, we provide market information that allows authors and publishers at that make better book publishing decisions and basically save yourself weeks, if not months, of research so that you can focus on what you should be doing as a writer, which is writing. And as a indie author or indie publisher, still you shouldn't get totally immersed with, all the business tasks. Outsource what you can. And basically, we are your market research department. So in simple terms, we provide for any genre, and there are more than 3,000. We can tell you exactly the sales potential, the sales trends, the level of competition in a genre or a niche, the price levels. Do prices go up, down, even down to things like, keywords, top selling covers, top authors and top publishers, you name it. And it's basically two components, or it's a big database where we've been monitoring Amazon over the years, and then we also try to do it like ready-made research for the authors. So all the legwork is done for you, and you can use it, if I'm allowed to use my consulting lingo, for very strategic questions, such as, what shall I write, or what twist shall I give my science fiction novels, what direction shall I take it? Down to very tactical things, into what categories shall I put my book on Amazon, and what is my competition doing? These sort of questions, that's what we do provide.
Wow, this is huge because, our typical listener, we know who our typical listener is, and they say, yeah, I'd love to have this information, but I do not want to do any of the work to grab this info. So a huge service of what you're providing for people. And I'm guessing you can do general reports to customized reports, everything else in between.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing which is a little bit like an on-demand service, so you can access the database yourself and, sort and filter and say, okay, let's sort all the science fiction subcategories, by sales or by level of competition, or combine it. Or, if you're, less, versed with data, we have like ready-made reports, which basically say, okay, let's talk about mystery, thriller, suspense, and let's talk about all the 70 subgenres within it, and get all the data out of that.
So if somebody is writing a number of, let's say they write fantasy, but within fantasy, like you say, there's many subgenres within that. They could say, well, I love writing these 3 or 4. Which one should I concentrate on? You actually provide that data, so they go, oh, this one is selling much better than the other 3. It makes sense for me to pursue this avenue.
That's exactly right. And obviously you can add a lot of criteria to that question, and I think we'll get to it in more detail as well, but what is the level of competition, or what is the price level, and all these sort of things. But I think one important thing I need to point out from the beginning, while, the data is one thing, the market is one thing, the other thing is the artist who brings a certain craft and a passion, hopefully, for a certain genre. And my personal mission is a little bit to, where art meets science is where we bring the market data to the artist, to the writer, to the creative person, and try to bring these two worlds together to create a good product.
Because it's not just about, knowing what categories are hot, right? Knowing whether fantasy or science fiction is hot. It's knowing, okay, I'm wanting to write in a specific subgenre. Which subgenre do I want to write for? And, this is for the right to market kind of philosophy. So if you're like have an artistic mindset and you're like, I just want to write the story that I want to write, K-lytics is not that helpful. You can like see the different covers perhaps and like what other popular covers are in your category, and maybe figuring out which subgenres to pick. But where this is really helpful is when you're a little bit flexible with your writing and you're willing to adapt to what people are wanting to buy. It doesn't mean you have to sell out. It doesn't mean you have to write in a genre that you hate. But knowing how to make those slight adaptations can make a huge difference in how many copies you sell. Because if you're writing in a really crowded genre that no one is buying in, say cookbooks, for instance, even if you write the best cookbook ever, no one wants to read a cookbook on a Kindle.
That's exactly right. And I think the last thing we want to have is writers and creative people out there waste their time and effort. And it's correct. If you simply write for the passion, you just write what comes to your mind. If you write to achieve a certain authority in a certain field, you can use the data to find say non-fiction areas that are still very easy to rank in. But if you are a fiction writer and you have a little bit flexibility, then if you're in mystery, thriller, suspense, you may want to know as a writer, and especially if I say not just indie author, but indie publisher, as soon as you put the very term publisher into your title, even if it's just an indie publisher, you have the responsibility to look at what the market wants. And this is what the data can bring to you. So is the mystery, thriller, suspense marking more going towards thrillers, more towards mystery? Within mystery, is it cozy? Or is it vigilante justice? Or is it female protagonist mystery? These are the sort of questions that you want to answer.
So what are the highest selling? Give us the scoop. What's the hottest categories right now on Amazon?
Well, it always depends on, what perspective you take, starting from a helicopter perspective. Because mind you, on Amazon right now, you have it's getting really crowded. You have 4.79 million English titles. And there's 70,000 books added every month. So book supply is still growing with about 18% per year. And I bet that ebook demand has slowed to a single-digit growth rate. So you really have to look at what's hot. So on a helicopter perspective, what people are usually not aware of in Amazon, and they still keep publishing cookbooks and these sort of things, is it's very simple. The top genre on Amazon Kindle is romance, and that is then followed by mystery, thriller, suspense, and then a little less science fiction and fantasy. Then you go into teen and young adult, then religion, spirituality, and then you get a long tail of all the other stuff. And obviously from there, you can break it down into more than 3,000 subgenres.
Wow. I'm just amazed at how many subgenres it can be broken down into.
So there's the popularity of the categories, but then there's also how competitive they are, right? So we know romance is the most popular category, but it's got to also be the most popular category amongst authors, where everyone is writing a romance. Are there any categories that have high popularity and yet low competition, in the sense of people are not writing very many books in that category comparatively?
Yeah, you raise a very, very important point. The one side of the equation is obviously demand. So what do readers buy? And even within romance, right, you can say, okay, within romance, what's currently hot? You have very big romance genres such as contemporary, romantic comedy selling very well, romantic suspense, then military romance, and a little less new adult and college. And then it goes into niches like sports romance, gothic romance, you name it. But on the other side, you have the level of competition. And there it's really important to note that the differences there are vast differences depending on the level you look at. So, for example, interesting, by the way, the biggest genre, not in terms of demand, but in terms of competition, on Kindle, few people know this, is religion and spirituality, with 597,000 English-speaking titles as we speak. Then in romance, you have a level of competition of 435,000 English-speaking titles. Then science fiction and fantasy, roughly, 150,000 English-speaking titles. So you see immediately the level of competition in sci-fi and fantasy is less than half of what it is in romance. But then you can break it even further down and ask yourself, well, what what is less competitive in romance? Even in romance, you find still niche markets today, like, say, Gothic romance, where you have currently roughly 2,170 English titles. Or you could say, let's go to science fiction, fantasy Arthurian, 200 titles, 280 titles. And the funny part is, while on the one end of the spectrum, you have things like romance, with more than 400,000 titles, you can niche it down to categories where you have only one title in the very category.
So if you came in that title and you were automatically guaranteed a number 2 bestseller spot in that category.
Yeah, and if you select the right one, you will be immediately a number 1. I mean, take an example such as right now, crafts, hobbies, and home / how-to and home improvements / subcategory small appliance repair, has only one English book in the category. Now, funny enough, that book is a paleo diet cookbook and not a how-to home appliance book because the person had that very strategy, but that's what you have, yes.
Because it's a bit of a hack, right? Somebody goes to that paleo diet book and it says number 1 bestseller, and it's a number 1 bestseller in a category with hardly any other books in it, which I don't know if I would recommend that because that's a little disingenuous. But it does give you an idea. If you're trying to write a book, it's like, wow, there is no competition in this subcategory. Real quick, I want to talk about how to pick a best category. But first, Jim, do we have a featured patron?
We do. We have our featured patron this week is Benjamin Ellefson, who lives in Costa Rica. He's
We have an international show today. We have a guest from Germany and a patron from Costa Rica.
Perfect timing. So he's an award-winning author. He writes middle grade books that really focus and celebrate the importance of self-reliance and preparedness and diversity. So here is his current book. It's called The Land Without Color. I love that title. I mean, imagine that, right? Land Without Color. Floating into the air with an enormous gum bubble, Alvin lands in a strange world where everything is gray. The trees, the flowers, the dirt, the sky, the animals, and even the people are all missing their color. Confronted with the mystery of the missing color, Alvin teams up with a talking squirrel and Spanish-speaking mouse to battle man-eating plants, outsmart the bumbling Crimson Guards, cross the sugar desert, overcome the two-headed dragon, and find the color-stealing goblins to restore color to the kingdom. I love that, Benjamin.
And you can find links to both Benjamin's website and his book in the show notes. Just scroll down in your iOS app or your podcast app, and you can just click to see if you want to find out more.
So back to your question about best category.
Yeah, Alex, how does somebody pick what the best category is for them in the sense of not everyone can write every kind of book, right? There's no way I'm going to write a romance. That's just not what I'm going to do. So how would I pick the best category? How would our listeners pick the best category?
Right. I mean, first thing you have to think about is what is your goal as a writer? So as you said before, if you just write for the love and passion for it, you don't care about categories, right? If you want to reach readers, you may want to look at your available subgenres, and we'll get into that in a second. If you just write for the authority, so if you're in nonfiction and say, hey, I want to be the number 1 authority in a certain field, you look at, what are the available categories there where you have very little competition, where very importantly, the Kindle market may not be the right channel for you to monetize, so to earn money with your knowledge, but it may be a vehicle to prove, hey, here I'm the number 1 bestseller in whatever gardening and horticulture, bonsai, growing bonsais. Kindle won't give you much money, but for you, a criteria is, hey, is that something where I can prove my authority being a bestseller? Now, for a fiction writer, in very simple terms, I use a very simple framework, which would be, well, what is the level of demand? So what are the sales? And what is the level of competition against it? So in other words, is it a very crowded place, or is there still space to breathe for an author or publisher? And then you could obviously get a little more sophisticated and say, oh, okay, well, these are 2 criteria, but you can add your own criteria. Do you have a certain craft skill in that genre? So is that a fit? Or you can take criteria from us where we could add things like, Well, what is the price level in the genres? Prices differ quite a bit. So, for example, price levels in mystery, thriller, suspense are still more healthy than in science fiction and fantasy, which in turn are more healthy than romance, which is a genre which comes very much at the tail end. So it's a bit like in the automotive industry, it would be your cheap mass market, right? While you have other genres where price levels are still pretty healthy.
So mystery, thriller, suspense is like the Lexus, and romance is like the Toyota. Where the cheaper, the books are, all the authors are competing on price, whereas with the mystery writers are not lowering their price as much, which means if you're coming in, you can charge a higher price for your books and people won't think that you're expensive.
That's right. And especially once you go into, say, also the nonfiction area or even technical books area. I mean, the extreme example is if you go on Kindle and try to download a book on maritime law, it can cost you $200, right? So just to also mention the extreme example. So prices do vary. And you're exactly right. If you go into romance, that's where you have to be highly productive, churn out books, by the dozen. And because it's exactly what you say, it's like a mass market for cars.
And a good strategy, I think, is if you're a beginning author, start with one of these less competitive markets, because it's easier to find a place for yourself in a less competitive market. And then as your platform grows, as the number of readers are familiar with you grows, and as your craft improves, then you're able to go for some of these more competitive markets. And, starting with high school football instead of going straight to the World Cup. And, it's really hard if you're just getting started to be playing at that professional level.
Yes. And especially it also has to do with your marketing budget. If you're a mystery thriller suspense writer, if you just say, I write mystery thriller suspense, and you be that generic, I mean, you're head on in competition with all the big whatever, the John Grishams, David Baldacci's of the world, and the traditional publishers. But if you say, no, I'm really going to niche it down on, financial thrillers with a female protagonist, some sort of that, niching it down, then you have a much higher chance of finding certain readers, targeting readers, and hopefully increasing the odds of success with a potentially still more limited marketing budget at the beginning of your career.
Is it dangerous to niche it down so far that there's 10 people who read these kind of books in the world and you've got all 10 of them, but it's only 10?
That's a big danger too. Especially we see it a lot in the nonfiction market, where on the back of these many, upload your book and get rich with Kindle type of courses we've had over the years, where, people were whatever, let's make a book about bonsais and stuff. And I can tell you that I think I made one calculation that just by looking at the genres and the odds of success, you have to imagine with the more than 4.5 million books on Kindle, if you look at the market share of, say, the rank positions, then one basically has to face the fact that of the about 1 billion to 1.5 billion in revenue that Amazon allegedly does with the Kindle platform, the top 12% of that revenue, 12% of that revenue is generated by the top 100 rank positions in the store. 30% of the revenue are generated by the top 1,000 ranked positions in the store, and 87% of all the revenue is generated by the top 50,000 books out of the 4.7 million. So is there a danger? Yes, there is a very high danger, because I can tell you from about 5,000 categories that we now monitor, only 15% of those, about 600 to 700, are what we could call commercially viable in terms of relatively high sales compared to a manageable competition. And you have a huge risk of people who say, I had an elderly couple and they come up and say, hey, we really know about gardening and horticulture. We want to write a Kindle book. And I say, don't even start. The top 20 title in gardening and horticulture is going to sell 3 books a day at maximum. So don't bother.
We have a lot of listeners who, we focus on marketing for fiction, but we have a lot of listeners who write nonfiction. What's your best tip for somebody that is writing or looking to write a nonfiction book at this moment?
Well, at this moment, especially on the Kindle platform, you really have to look at the data on what is selling. Of course, there are evergreen topics also in nonfiction, such as mate seeking, such as parenting, such as relationships, and obviously certain diet niches. Ketogenic diet is still currently very big. But the point there is what many people don't know, a fact about the Amazon platform is Amazon has the Kindle bestseller list, and it has on the website, it's advertised as a print bestseller list. But once you click through it, you will notice that it's not a print bestseller list. In fact, it's a cross-format book bestseller list. And so we recently looked at what is the penetration of formats across these various genres. And a very interesting finding is that while things like for your fiction authors, romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, sci-fi, and fantasy, the ebook penetration of the top 100 is more than 70%. So there you cannot go wrong. But as soon as you go into nonfiction, for example, self-help, if you look at the top 100 on Amazon, only 15% of those are ebooks. So you really also have to look at a paperback, a hardcover strategy if you go into nonfiction. What I keep telling the nonfiction people is there are pockets where you can still make money. You will also have to have a print strategy and potentially an Audible strategy. But also you have to say, is it really the book that I want to earn my money with? Or is it another vehicle? I do webinars or have a YouTube channel or do live seminars with my clients. That's a very important thing to decide before you go into nonfiction publishing strategy.
Because you can make a lot of money giving speeches, and it's a lot easier to get speaking opportunities if when the event coordinators are looking up on Amazon, they see that you're a #1 bestseller. They're like, oh, well, this guy must be the man or the woman for this topic. And they book you right away, and you can make your money that way. So it is important. And I know we don't talk too much about nonfiction. So this is the Novel Marketing Podcast, but for nonfiction, it's really important to think outside of the book and think in terms of career and making money with your expertise more broadly. Alex, we're almost out of time, but real quick, tell us what your predictions are for the future. Where do you see the Kindle store going in the next 5-10 years?
Well, almost by definition, it's going to keep growing. I think the big question is right now, if you compare the Amazon platform with the your Library of Congress in the United States, Amazon has grown bigger than the Library of Congress, right? So you have about 20 times as many electronically available items than in the Library of Congress. And it's, as I said, growing with 70,000 items by the month. And the big issue is, right now, also question going forward is Amazon going to be and remain, Amazon Kindle, a Library of Congress, i.e. none of the books are going to be deleted, shelf space is unlimited? Or will there at a certain point, because the user experience may also start to deteriorate, because if you now type in, I want to read a whatever financial thriller, and you get 20,000 search results at a certain stage, also the user experience deteriorates. So one big prediction is going to be, I think Amazon will make a decision as to whether they will introduce, I'm not saying censorship, but a certain quality stage gate into what gets uploaded to the store, which currently is really, really poor and deteriorates their user experience, which should be a priority and is a priority for Amazon. And related to that, the big question is going to be, and we see already the start, is shelf space limited or unlimited? And obviously it is limited in a way in terms of what gets shown. So ad costs will go up, the platform will grow. Amazon does have about 80-85% market share of the ebook market. So I don't think that dominance is going to go away. So if you're in the ebook game, I think there is no way around Amazon for the time to come.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know whenever we talk about data, there's always so much that can be said. And I know our listeners are going to have a lot of questions about specific topics. And so what I'd like to do is do a webinar with you and me and our listeners. If anyone wants to come in, you can get questions answered about your specific genre and go into more detail with that. So, Alex, if that's all right with you, or we've actually talked about this ahead of time, so I know it's all right with Alex. We're going to do it on Monday at 3:00, and we'll have a link in the show notes if you want to come to that webinar to learn more. And it's a totally free webinar. You can come with your questions. We're going to dive into the numbers. I realize numbers aren't for everyone. And some authors, this really makes them kind of break out in hives, and that's okay. But if you want to learn more, I do encourage you to come to that webinar.
I do look forward to it, and don't be afraid. You know, my job for 20 years was whatever the complexity of the analysis, the result has to be made so simple and conveyed in such a simple fashion that we used to say in our former company that kids, grandmothers, grandfathers, and corporate CEOs can understand it.
Even corporate CEOs. I love it.
All right. This episode has been brought to you by the novelmarketing.com Patreon campaign. So many of our listeners help support the show by paying a monthly donation. And we just want to say thank you so much. In fact, to say thank you, we are upgrading the $5 level. So the $5 level comes with 2 exclusive episodes every month and a bunch of other features, exclusive discounts, but we're upgrading it one more time. And that is everyone at the $5 level will have their book featured on novelmarketing.com. Initially, this was only for the higher levels, but once I got my book table set up, I could add new books in about 10 seconds a book. And so I'm like, why not just open this up to everyone at the $5 level? So if you want to learn more, go to novelmarketing.com and click the Patreon button. We would love to have your support and help you promote your book.
You've been listening to James L. Rubart, Thomas Umstattd Jr., and our special guest, Alex Newton, on the Novel Marketing Podcast, giving you novel ideas on how to promote yourself and your writing, offline, online, and everywhere in between. Thanks so much for listening.